What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death of the Fingers, the circle of fifths and the cycle of fourths, if you will. How do you use it? I've been asked this a couple million times, of course. And most of the time, people have a misunderstanding about how powerful this tool can be. And we're going to expose that power in this video. Of course we are. So basically, we're going to go over the basic theory about how it's used and what we use it for, how it functions in music, essentially, which is a very big concept. And then, of course, at the end, we do a little example where I kind of show you just the first sequence, and then I show you basically in terms of an auditory example about how to start to mess around with it and make it sound more interesting, but still maintaining essentially the same basic structure. Now, listen, you're going to hear me do a simple example of both the inversions and then how to layer the dominant 7 versions over top of them. That's another big one that you have to know, obviously, if you want to do this. So if you're going to practice anything, practice those arpeggio shapes until you can play them backwards and forwards, both of them, of course, the major and the dominant 7 variants and all their inversions, because that's going to be step number 1 to basically being successful at this stuff. So without further ado, let's get into the theory part of it. All right, let's talk about basically some of the music stuff here, and it's not going to be this super dry theory thing. Listen, when I see this math equation here and I see this addition symbol, I know what that means. It means take this number and take this number, add them together to get this new number. And the equal signs means something to me too. It's telling me that I need to put the resultant, if you will, on the other side of this thing so that this equation makes sense. So someone from all over the world could look at 2 plus 2 and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Equals 4. You could hold up 2 fingers and 2 fingers. You have 4 fingers. Maybe not in 2025, but whatever. That's another video. So once you get that far, you're like, okay, well, music operates in very much the same way. So I have a chord. Here's G. And then I have the same chord that is like G7, right? And that chord is just a variation of the first chord, but it also functions in relation to the chord that was previous to it. Meaning when I have 2 chords, there's like an interaction, and we call those things functions, essentially because we want to do something. Do we want to prolong the one chord? Do we want to use that as a leaping off point? And that's exactly what the sort of the exercise we're going to be looking at today covers, is essentially this idea that when you go from a stable chord like G major and then you change it to G7, you introduce what we call tension. Okay, and that tension creates what I call musical gravity. And obviously musical gravity means that it pulls towards another key center. In this case, the circle of fifths. Yeah, I know, shocker. And once that happens, you can move to a new key. So in practical sort of like songwriting ideas, you have a song that's in G major and you just did a 1-4-5 chord progression and you've landed on G, but you want to repeat the course again, but also get what we call a lift. So essentially now you're going to play the G as a G7 chord to act as a leaping off point. So now you can just jump up to the key of C. Nails it, and now you can do a 1-4-5 there, which is going to give you the FGC. And there it is. There's 80s music 101 kind of situation. So that's where this circle of fifths comes in handy. We're going to kick it up a notch, obviously, with arpeggios, but it's essentially the same idea. And we just go through the various inversions. So that's all there is really to it. And the thing with the circle of fifths is it's a nice visual representation. You can look at it, but essentially you can see it visualized on the fretboard too. If I move to the note E on the A string and I do a power chord on the low E string with it, well, I'm going to get the note A. So the A is the parent key of E when E is the 5 chord. If I move down to D, obviously it's going to be G. If I move down to F sharp as the root, then I put my finger on C sharp, and so on and so forth. And so that right there is basically showing you that you can just keep doing this process over and over and over again and basically traverse all 12 keys. And they used to in the old days, of course. Now in the real world, you'd only do it maybe once or twice. But if you're practicing these arpeggios, it gives you a really great tool to just keep going and going and going. So now, without further ado, let's get into these arpeggio sequences. All right, I'm not really interested in getting lost in the weeds here, so I'm just going to explain this simply. Basically, what you have is we're moving from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, okay? And that's the progression we're using, which is a perfect cadence. In this case, we're also using it as the cycle of fifths. So what that means is I'm going to start on A chord here. So essentially, in this case, we're starting on E major, because I was like, I need some room to basically move these arpeggios around, right? And once I did that, what I did was just continue on with the E major triad arpeggios in the next inversion, right? So when I play it with the note E in the bass, that's the root. And when I move to the next note in the sequence, the third, it's going to be the first inversion. When I move to the next note in the sequence, the fifth of the chord, you're going to be at the second inversion, and then you get back to miraculously the root again. I know, it's madness. So that simple process that you can see me flashing up here on the fretboard is incredibly important. The order and the distances never changes. And so you have to know this sequence backwards and forwards. And then if I were to now add in the 5 chord, well, I know that's going to be a dominant 7 chord. And again, I need that dominant 7 flavor to create the tension that basically drives the musical gravity to allow me to jump to a new key. Otherwise, when I just move to the new key, there's no transition there, and it sounds really abrupt and not so great. Okay, so that's why we have this dominant 7. It functions as like a transitionary sort of chord to allow me to move from this one key center to a new key center that's basically sympathetic to it. There, I said it. So essentially now you're doing all of those inversions where you have 1, 3, 5, and flat 7, right? So essentially, when I'm playing the first sort of inversion there, right, the root inversion, I can see that this one here layers over top of it. Now, if you're a smart person, you'd be like, okay, the first one there I notice is Ionian, that's for sure. But when you do the next one, oh, that's at Mixolydian. Why? Because, of course, the dominant 7 starts at the 5th degree. So I'm just going to take the dominant 7 arpeggio that normally happens at the 5th degree and shift it all the way down to the 1st degree in this case now, because I'm doing a 1-5 chord progression in this case. And once I do that, of course, I can just map out the rest of the inversions and job is done. And then it's a question of speed of mind. If you're just playing these arpeggios randomly and you're using the circle of fifths as your guiding principle, you start at E and you're playing through the E major ones, and then you go into E7 and you're cycling through the E7 ones, as you'll see in the example. Well, the next one obviously is going to be A. Can you just reach out and grab an A major arpeggio? And then when you're playing the A major sequence, when the backing track changes, can you just jump on the A7 arpeggio and play that sequence? Now, no one can teach you this. You have to teach it to yourself by just learning this sequence of arpeggios, both as a major and the dominant 7 sequence, and be good enough to switch between either or, where the bass note ends up being based around the circle of fifths. So I keep doing these jumps because when I corrupt that 1 chord, E to E7, it allows me to jump down to A. And when I corrupt the A chord now with A7, I can jump down to the next one, which is going to be whatever it is. And I'm not going to tell you. Well, I probably would tell you because, you know, I can never keep it to myself, but you get the point. You're supposed to use power chords essentially to figure it out from that point. And that's another one of those skills. If you sit there and kind of call them out and whatnot, and then figure out how to do power chords across multiple strings, I think you'll find that this is a very, very useful tool. And more importantly, of course, it gives you a certain measure of order, so you can use this in your music as well as a soloing idea or as a songwriting idea. So you're going to see me do a performance. I map out the first one there. I keep it real simple. But near the end, you start hearing me mess around with the dominant 7 ones and making it a little bit more interesting, right? And that's really what you're working towards. So even when you get at the higher levels, instead of just playing these simple arpeggio shapes, you're going to start to fill in all the blanks and make it sound more like a solo, using arpeggios as the vehicle, right? By filling in some of the chromaticism and 3 notes per string, using whatever system you're going to use. And Bob is your uncle, Mint. So there it is. Not much more to talk about the circle of fifths in terms of this video. Start factoring in these arpeggios and whatnot, and then learn the sequence, and then of course start stringing them together, where you start off with 1, E major or G major or A major, and then you convert the same sequence into its dominant 7 equivalent, which would be like G7 or A7, and then of course jump to its 1 chord. So when A is the 1, you know it's D major. Done. And when you keep practicing that skill of just jumping to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, you'd be like, I can use cadences like that. It's a little vehicle for me, a little shortcut, if you will, to have this transitionary chord to let me jump to new things. And I think you'll find that that's exceptionally powerful, especially for songwriting and for soloing. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate every single one of you and wish you, of course, all the success in the world with respect to your practicing. Just keep at it. Keep the nose to the grindstone. Don't put your goals too high, but work yourself with diligence and whatnot. And then ultimately, I guarantee you'll reach your goals, but it's up to you. You got to make it happen for yourself. It's like going to the gym. Be disciplined. We'll see you in the next one.